Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and we are here today with Jeff Potter, the editor-in-chief of The Commons, our local independent newspaper. Thanks, Jeff, for coming on.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate having the opportunity to do so.
Yes, yeah, we're glad you're here. We have a lot of questions for you.
All right. Well, we're usually the ones to ask the questions.
I know.
So you can make me squirm for
half
an hour.
Good. Yeah, we like to turn the tables on people. Hopefully, no one will ever do that to me.
It's poetic justice.
It is. So let's just start in with your early days. I know that you actually spent time in a newspaper room in high school.
Yep. Yeah. In high school, I got my first newspaper job when I was 16 years old. It was at the former newspaper in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, and I was a kind of hang around the newspaper office at the end of the week after everything was done and ask a lot of questions and help out with little odds and ends. And back in the day, I would one of the things I would have to do would be to type renewal postcards, manual typewriter to the subscribers. I mean, well, this isn't the 1930s. This was actually 1983, so we're not talking generations ago, but technology makes it seem a lot more archaic than it really was.
Yes. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that later, how technology has changed things, but I love the idea of being a newsboy, because that's a whole character in itself. It often appears in a lot of the old movies of the kid running around with pieces of paper to the different editors at their desks and coming in with hot items from Main Street. But also the smell of the place, right? The ink and iron.
I have to say I've never been lucky enough to actually work for a newspaper that was printed on site. So, but the old newsrooms did have a very distinctive smell.
Yes.
In this case, it was smell of phototypesetting chemicals and darkroom chemicals commingled with a lot of cigarette smoke.
I was going to say, the cigar and cigarette smoke and the bourbon in the bottom drawer and all that. Yeah.
Thankfully, I have not carried on those traditions, but it's
at the Commons,
or anywhere. In fact, I got out of the newspaper business because I was the only non-smoker, and I couldn't afford health insurance. So my doctor, it was at a certain point, my doctor said I shouldn't be working with smokers. So
that's pretty funny.
So I felt I couldn't cut it in the newspaper business. So. But it pulled me back in eventually.
Yeah, right. So, when did you get back into it? Was it after college?
It was after. Well, I edited a newspaper out of college. One of my mentors offered me a job. It was pretty much the only thing I hadn't done was edit the newspaper, and so I said, "Sure, I'd love to edit the newspaper. How do you edit a newspaper?" So I asked a lot of questions and bought an awful lot of books and learned a lot on the fly and became really, I think, pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And had some mentors there, including a classmate who actually now works for the New York Times, who was who had an instinctive knowledge for an appreciation of all of this stuff, and we were a great team there.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you were at Middlebury, right?
I was at Middlebury, yeah.
Did skiing lure you, or
no,
was it a school?
I couldn't afford to ski, but it felt like home, and I grew up in rural western Massachusetts, and the towns out, Middlebury and the towns outside of Middlebury really felt like home. And the nice thing about being a poor kid attending a rich college is they gave me pretty much a free ride.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So that was a really fantastic opportunity.
Yes, and that was back in the 80s.
That was back in the 80s.
Yeah. And you studied math, I believe.
I studied math. That's a long story.
Has that come into play at all?
Actually, yes. Yeah? It actually does. Because math is all about logic, consistency, continuity, and proof. Truth and proof.
Truth and proof.
And the structure of language and how language communicates and the precision in which you edit people's work requires a lot of the same thought processes and skills. And so it is not unrelated. And in fact, I would encourage any aspiring journalist to get good at math, take a probability and statistics course. There's a lot of, you could cut through a lot of baloney, and by knowing, being able to quantify things and to be able to discern whether something, whether it adds up, literally.
Yeah. That's very interesting, because I don't think I ever would have thought to ask you anything about math.
Yeah.
If
Well,
I hadn't known that.
it is admittedly a non-traditional entree into the world of journalism.
Yeah.
But not uncommon either.
Really?
Altogether uncommon. In fact, two professional friends who used to work at the Greenfield Recorder, one is a publisher and one is the editor, actually turns out both of them had degrees in math.
Interesting.
And that was a pleasant surprise to find that out.
In doing a little background on this, I ran into this great quote. And nowadays, of course, we don't know if quotes are who they are attributed to, if that's true or not, which goes into another subject. We'll talk about fake news. But the first rough draft of history, journalism, is the first rough draft of history. I like that quote.
I don't know who you can attribute that to. It's
Ben Franklin, right?
Yeah,
or Thomas Jefferson, one of those guys.
We could go into trying to figure out exactly who said that, but I'm more, I like that quote on its
own 2 feet,
on its
right?
own 2 feet.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's almost some people would call it a cliche, but really, it is pretty true, because we do a lot of newspapers at their best will get the information as we know it right now, as best we know it. And as a story develops, especially a large and complex story that unfolds itself over time, Russia, we don't know what we don't know, and there are going to be rough edges. There are going to be corrections.
Right.
There are going to be the more cynical among us are going to say, "Aha, you got it wrong," where everybody I know who's good at what they do in journalism, we try our darndest not to get it wrong. Mistakes, we're only human. Mistakes will happen. The best thing we can do is acknowledge them, correct them, assimilate that new information, and run with that new context and try better next time. And that's how you can't get better if you don't own your mistakes. You can't get good if you don't make mistakes in the first place. And that's part of what makes newspapers rough. I don't know any better way to do the process. All I can say is that they're a little less rough than throwing random thoughts onto Twitter.
Right.
And at least you have the opportunity to check things and to refine things and to develop ideas and to iterate versions of a story that will get progressively less rough over time. That's just the nature of it.
Right.
And there will, when real histories are written, then that all of that becomes a good primary contemporaneous source that can then be put into the larger perspective.
For source,
There's a time and a place for the non-rough drafts of history.
But looking back, I mean, for any of us to look back at, say, a Walter Cronkite, show on TV, I know that's not paper, but even to look at, when you look at old newspapers, and you realize, oh my God, this was just the tip of that iceberg that turned into whatever it was, and to realize how it was covered at that time and what the response was, and then look at letters to the editor, right, and the public response and all that. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah. And so is fact-finding, with all the new technology, is fact-finding tremendously different now?
I would say that at its core, it's not terribly different. I think that the new technologies give us all better tools to do it better and faster and easier. Here's a way to look at it. When in my first editing job, in fact, I had a desk that's much the same color as this, kind of one of those old army desks.
Yes, right.
And I had from one end to the other, I had stocked it with an entire mini reference library of a good Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 3 almanacs. Every year I would get a different update of an almanac, so I'd have 3 different ones in rotation.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And dictionaries of slang, dictionary, Spanish English dictionary, Latin English dictionary, dictionary of regionalism. It was a mini reference library, and I could think.
Yes, it was.
So, and you could give that the seal of approval as a librarian.
Yeah, right.
But the process of checking things, I would, my editorial process hasn't differed considerably, but I would be editing things mostly with a blue pencil and blue and red pencil.
Right.
A
double-ended, yep.
Double-ended pencil.
Yep.
And I would be pulling out the dictionary and check spellings. I would be pulling out the almanacs and check place names.
Yes.
I would want to check this stuff and make sure it was correct.
Right, as you went along,
and as you go along. Now, all of that is gone, and I can literally sit in a pizza restaurant on deadline and edit our voices section with my computer and internet connection and Google. What we have to do differently now is know whether what we're finding on Google is true and trustworthy.
Yes.
So that in itself is a whole different set of skills that I'm always trying to develop over time.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that I've developed that well.
So one thing that's kind of wonderful about the way things are now with technology at your fingertips and laptops that you can just carry anywhere you want is that we can see you, the editor of our hometown paper, sitting in the co-op, sitting in the jazz lounge, sitting, in random places around town, working on the paper.
I really like that. I could be sitting at home in my pajamas,
right?
Just as easily. But what I like about it is it's twofold. I don't get a lot of people who stop by and say hi, but if people know me and they see me, they're welcome to, and they do stop and chat and usually talk about the paper because they know I'm probably sitting there working on it.
Yes, right.
Or if I see somebody coming by, I'll get a constant stream of stimuli that give me infinite numbers of story ideas, and in an environment that that it just helps the paper if I do it that way. Yes. It helps the community if I do it that way. I feel it's really good. It can be as good outreach as I make it, and I'd like to be out there more than I can be right now.
Yeah, and I think there is something really wonderful about you being available to the community, and people knowing that they can come up to you and give you a real quick letter to the editor, right, if they want to. And that, that brings me to the question of, how is it for you being, you've taken a lot of hits over the years, a lot of personal hits, a lot of letters to the editor that are aimed at you or that you have to address in a certain kind of way, good and bad.
I would say I've been lucky. I don't get a lot of hits.
That's pretty great.
I'm kind of surprised about that sometimes. But let me just say that when I do, it just means that somebody's reading and thinking about it. And the one thing that we put a lot of heart and soul into the paper. That doesn't mean I expect people to like everything that we do. I think it is absolutely valid for people to say, I really despise what you've published here, and that's happened occasionally. I think that sometimes, especially with Vermont Yankee material, people have very, very, very strong feelings on both sides of that very polarized issue.
Right.
And I was hired right in the middle of that. And there have been some tense moments where I've published something that one side or the other of that feels is untruthful or unfair. And 40 years into it, there are a lot of irreconcilable differences. I have my own personal opinions, but I feel very strongly that as the steward of our newspaper, and especially the Voices section, our editorial and op-ed section, that I become, I put any personal opinions aside and become a responsible coach and advocate for what writers are trying to say, even if they're trying to say something that is complaining about our coverage or our approach or our editorial priorities or anything. It can be not in our best interest, but I will be the first person to help people create a dialogue and a discussion about what's true and what's not.
Right, right. And that's, that obviously is free speech in action. And I think that, along with maintaining a neutrality, even though certainly you have your own opinions, and still and all, I think that we feel that there is a flavor to the Commons, to the New York Times, to the Reformer, to whatever.
Yeah.
So we have an affinity.
Yeah, I mean, the newspapering is very personal, and the small newspapers are very much the product of the very few people that put them out. So that is to be expected.
In relation to what you're talking about with being the steward of the newspaper, I was thinking of this, that you're in a position where I would think that you would be pretty finely attuned to the climate of the community, the town, but also the state and the nation. All of those things together are definitely going to be influencing how you turn out that paper that week, right?
And these are times that are very challenging for figuring out exactly how to respond to those cues. If we were in normal times, let's just say we were in normal times, like say 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when I started, almost just a little over 10 years ago, I was hired for this job, and was plunked into a community that had a very divisive nuclear power issue, and I think I quantified this 10 years ago. I'm sure it's still the case, but Brattleboro is Windham County is the most liberal town in the most liberal state in the Union by some estimates. If the Commons is going to do its job and be a snapshot of the community, the Commons is going to be inherently lefty. And that's okay. What I don't want is to disenfranchise anybody in this community. I'm still troubled that we don't get a lot of center-right contributions to our editorial page, and that's not for lack of trying. We have personally invited people who hold some of these views, and I will do so again. In fact, anybody listening to this who thinks, oh, that left-wing rag, I would love to have your contributions. Voices at commonsnews.org. I might not agree with what you write. You may be surprised I might agree with some of what you write. I will treat you with the utmost respect and be an advocate for your ideas on that page, as I have described. So suppose you were plunked down into a normal situation like that, where you were editing a newspaper in a lefty community that had a very distinct minority, but present minority of people who did not agree. I love that sort of tension. I love being able to try to ferret out good opposing viewpoints, to be able to create a community infrastructure that lives up to the name of our newspaper. We want this to be a common ground. We want to emphasize what we all have in common. We want to be a safe and hospitable venue for competing ideas. We want people to be able to duke it out with civility and a common cause, kind of like the old cartoons, the sheepdog and wolf cartoons. Good night, Ralph. Good night, Sam. We all for the readers of this newspaper, you all live here. We want to be able to give you good news that everybody can trust, and a vibrant and effective editorial page. So the challenge now becomes, what happens when the Republican Party goes off the rails into the realm of surreality? And I'm not saying that as a partisan. I hope that what I just said made it clear that I wouldn't do that. Right. But how do you when you have at the national level a party that is behind somebody that is just manifestly incapable of executing this job. And again, this is this is a guy who's engaging in Twitter wars with other foreign power. It's like, what? This isn't partisan.
Right.
This isn't partisan. I don't. And how do you square that? How do you square that with saying we're going to be hospitable to alternate ideas, and say we're not going to be a referendum for whether racism is okay?
Yeah. Right.
There are things that are becoming normalized in the national political discussion that I am never going to normalize if I am doing my job right. And if you disagree with me on that, man, I'm sorry. I just can't.
Well, as a journalist too, you are covering the news.
Yeah.
So you're covering things at different levels depending on the paper. And so for you to be able to represent your community is one thing.
Right.
But for you to be able to report some news on a national level, or how it reflects or it has something to do with this community, it seems to me it would be a constant balance. And even each paper, as you turn out each paper each week, there has to be a certain amount of balance within that issue.
Well, and we're trying to define what is balance.
Yeah, good question.
I think this week's paper is a good example. We do have a cover story on refugees and their and their sanctuary in this area. I think objectively it is a look at the consequence of changing national policy and execution of policy. Some people will probably look at it and say that it's that this is a bunch of snowflakes trying to normalize people who break the immigration law. I mean, I'm obviously struggling with some of these things because I don't want to. This is the rough draft here.
That's right.
I mean, all I can do is we could do the best we can. I'm hoping that if I'm doing my job right, a year from now I'll look back and say, oh yeah, that's how I should have done that story. That's how we should have edited this story.
Yeah.
That's what our reporter should have gone and looked for.
Yeah.
What I can say is that we have the writing staff that we have are all very individual, unique. They are smart as hell, and they are all, to a person, committed to doing the right thing, whatever that is. Now, reasonable people can disagree on whether they succeed at that or whether or what the definition is. Wendy M. Levy, our reporter, this is a fairly new career for her. She comes at it very naturally. I can tell you that the questions she asks in the newsroom of me and my colleague Randy Holhut about ethics and about approaches to stories and about some of these very same issues prove to me that the very fact that she's thinking about these questions mean that this is a story of value and to the community, and the community is being treated fairly. And again, if anybody disagrees, the voices at commonsnews.org, we would always love to hear alternate viewpoints. I'm not going to go down crazy rabbit holes, but I'll go down sane rabbit holes.
Yeah, right. I think too, the one point that you bring up is having younger people on staff with you. I would think would be really not only refreshing, but they're bringing a whole different kind of information to you.
And that's what I want to start to get. I want to get into that a little bit. One of the programs that we have, I'm not sure you mentioned this at the top of the show, but the Commons is a nonprofit newspaper.
Yeah, right.
And it's published under the umbrella of Vermont Independent Media. That's our 501c3 nonprofit. Donations are tax deductible. And the other project that we have is the Media Mentoring Project, which actually predates the publication of the Commons. One of our goals at Vermont Independent Media is to empower people of all ages to make media and to learn reporting and to engage with their communities and practice these skills, because they are not difficult, they are essential, and they build a community, and heck, it's fun.
Yes, and they're the next ones to carry that torch as well.
One of our former writers, Allison Teague, is now spearheading the media mentoring project and getting those underway all over in Brattleboro, in Bellows Falls, in Putney. Eventually, we want to branch out to other venues on the other side of the county as well. We've also had school newspaper projects. We've developed some curriculum for schools over the years. And one of the things that we really want to do right now is try to bring some of this program back into the newspaper, into the Commons.
Oh, good.
And so we've got a new intern starting this week from Brattleboro Union High School. We're going to be developing a more structured, I won't say curriculum per se, but really, we've always had really good luck bringing people of all ages into the newsroom and just throwing them stories to write, and that's great when they do it, but we would like to have a little bit more structure and support for them. And so in that spirit of education and training and development, we really want to create a framework where we can have and be very proactive in getting a number of young people and novices and people who want to learn this out there in the community reporting this stuff.
Yes.
And we have had a couple of donations that will let us give a little bit of an honorarium for that sort of thing. We really want to engage people in their communities, and we want to, between Randy and me, we've got probably about 70 years of newspaper experience, and we love teaching people how to do it.
That's sobering, isn't it?
It's very sobering. I started out as a 22-year-old.
Well, that's the thing about getting older. You remember yourself as a young person, right? There's so much more that we could talk about. So many more interesting stories. We'll have to have you on again, which would be lovely.
I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah,
and anybody, seriously, if you see me around town, you don't have to know me. You could just come up and introduce yourself. If I wanted to be quiet and working, I'd be in an empty office and newsroom doing this. It's a lot more interesting if I'm out there and get to meet the people that we're writing about. So don't be shy. Please don't be shy.
There you go, folks. There's an open invitation from
and voices@commonsnews.org. If something we publish gets you upset, have at it.
Yeah.
Or if you like what we do, we'd like to hear that too.
Right. Feedback is wonderful. It makes such a big difference, and we will have that information at the end of the show also.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on, Jeff. It was really great to have you. Thank all of you for being with us again for Here We Are. We'll be back next week, and we really are grateful to Jeff for coming on today. He's a busy guy. Today is one of his less busy days because the paper is out today, but we are grateful for him and for Randy also, who had some input on this. And as he said, get in touch, give feedback. It's our community, and you're part of it. Thank you. See you next time.